Figure it out.
Hello, this is Adam Koralik from Figured Out Productions. The following video is a video of some kind, and I hope you enjoy it.
Hey guys, it's Adam here, and if you're watching this the day it came out, it is the Sega Dreamcast's 21st birthday. Now, for those of you who've been watching the channel for a long time, you'll know that, hey man, I'm a big fan of the Sega Dreamcast, and every year on its birthday, really since I started the channel, I've done some sort of little video just kind of acknowledging it, celebrating it, and just kind of talking about what the last calendar year since its previous birthday has really kind of been like for the console. And some years are more exciting than others. Not that this one isn't exciting, but it is 2020, so you have to keep in mind everything is not as good as it otherwise could be. So this year, I'm going to keep it real with you. The Dreamcast's last year it had some stuff happen, but nothing like insane. But that said, I still think it would be cool to go ahead and talk about it. And of course, because it's now 21, at least in the US, it can now have a drink. And it's partied very hard, as you can tell right there. But whereas in other countries, I think 21 is like the oldest drinking age in the world is the US. And then most countries, it's like 19 or 18 or even lower than that. But regardless, now here it can drink, and it has made good use of that feature. No, not really, obviously, because it would be very broken. But anyway, so let's talk about the stuff that has happened, right? So basically we got a couple of new games, we got some new accessories and things like that, and we have some hope for the future. Now, first and foremost, the thing I want to talk about is an unreleased game that actually saw its way out, which is Heroes of Might and Magic 3. I did an entire video on that. It is a game originally made by Ubisoft that was supposed to be, I think, a launch title for the console, and it didn't ultimately pan out due to technical limitations. Recently, within the last year, obviously, that particular game was dumped and launched onto the internet. And like I said, I did a video on it. If you actually run it with something like the GDMU, it actually plays back very well. That's recommended over trying to run it off of like a burned disk, for example, because the loading times just make that game almost unplayable off of a disk. But that said, while that's not essentially a new release, it is kind of cool that we got to experience that.
7 weeks have passed since we set sail from Enroth. Slaves freed from our skirmishes with Regnan fleets talk of the turmoil in Arathia. I suspect their stories are true, but I must see the evidence with my own eyes. The ocean tides were kind enough to bury the fallen on its shores. However, the smoking ruins of Cloudfire greeted us with nothing but destruction and the stench of death. With no survivors, only the battlefield could tell me what happened here. Despite the breath of devastation, the presence of Minotaurs suggests a raiding party. However, the ranks were too well organized. This is the work of the dungeon overlords. Evidently, the wizards were prepared, but overrun nevertheless. These atrocities rend my heart and fuel my anger. Arathia's banner must be respected, never disgraced. I think of my beloved Roland and my son Nikolai, and how much further this war will carry me from them. But my duty is clear. My father's kingdom must survive. Arathia must not fall to its enemies.
talking about mostly fresh new releases. First one I want to talk about is Volgar the Viking. Now I did an entire video on this as well. This is a fantastic game. But this one is, even when I made the video originally, it's very debatable whether or not this even counts. Because technically this game has been out for many years on the Dreamcast. The only reason it would be included is because within the last year it finally became readily available for really anyone to get. And if you want to check it out, I'll put a link in the description to get Volgar the Viking or some of the other, more recent independent releases. But this one was a very fun game, and it's been available on multiple platforms. And it is one of the only physical editions of this game in particular. So very cool to have that and to be able to enjoy it, because this was also a very legitimate game. It wasn't just, I mean, not that the games aren't legitimate, but like this one was actually like released on relevant platforms and was even the Xbox Live Gold game at one point. So for it to also have a physical Dreamcast edition was very cool. But the big, like, legit release, and then there's no technicalities or asterisks or anything like that, was this. This is Xeno Crisis. This was a Kickstarter-funded project that originally came out for the Sega Genesis, like, a year or two ago. It's been so long. I think it was actually, like, 2 years ago, which is kind of hard to believe. But the Dreamcast version, which is what I backed it for, is a very cool game. It's kind of like Robotron 2084 if it was made by SNK. It's a lot of fun. It clearly is very SNK and Neo Geo inspired. It's got some like Resident Evil type of vibes to it and stuff. Very cool game. I'm actually an NPC in this game. You can actually rescue me. I'm a hostage repeatedly, and come save me, help me out. I'll put a link in the description too if you want to check this out. But this was a brand new release for 2020. It hadn't been released on the Dreamcast in any prior way. The game itself had existed prior to that, but the Dreamcast version didn't. So that would actually be it for the new games, but it wasn't it for the Dreamcast in general. Possibly the biggest release of the year, debatably, was this. This is the Retro Fighters Striker DC controller. Now, this is a brand new Dreamcast controller developed by the guys at Retro Fighters who had done multiple controllers like the Brawler 64, the Brawler Gen for the Genesis and the Saturn. They did an NES controller as well. I've really liked a lot of their controllers, and they often go on to be like the replacement for the controllers I've been using. This one was, I think a lot of people really wanted this for the Dreamcast, was like more than most of them. And I think that largely has to do with the fact that I love the Dreamcast controller, but to a lot of people, it's a controller that really just didn't age very well. Our sense of how a controller has become, kind of wider. This particular shape, with the two prongs that you kind of hold on to, as opposed to like that fatter style that the Dreamcast went for. I always liked it, but it was really a controller that's made for the era in which it exists. And it was, it's when the games were actually designed for that controller, it worked very well. But to a lot of people, it just didn't age well. I think the biggest complaint I heard about this controller to a lot of people was like, where's the second thumbstick? And I'm just sitting there thinking like, there seems to be a lot of people on the internet who think that if you just add a second thumbstick, then all the games would have free motion camera. And I'm like, I don't know why you think that would happen. That's not built into the games. That's not how that works. Or maybe it's just like, it's just the psychological need to feel one there. And I gotta admit, I'm even guilty of it too. Like when I would play some games with it, I would try to like rotate and then realize there's nothing there. So I get that. I get like the instinct thing, but I can understand why practically they didn't put it on there. The only reason to practically put it on there would be for the handful of games where you could map it to the X, Y, and A, B buttons, and then kind of clone a thumbstick. But the only game I can think of that would actually utilize that correctly would be like Soldier of Fortune 2. Beyond that, I don't think there's any Dreamcast games that would actually use that the way you kind of envision it working. Maybe there are some, like I'm not totally sure, but that's the only one that I'm aware of. Either way, this was a very cool controller, and it is actually how I go about playing the Dreamcast now. It has... You can go ahead and watch the original review if you want more details on the controller specifically. So I'll just put a link in the description if you want to check it out. There are actually a lot more colors for this now. This was obviously meant to replicate the original controller's gray design, but they have gone ahead and made new colors that actually match a lot of the other releases. So I give them props for that because the color tone is like perfect. It like matches in exactly, and I think that's a nice little love letter for the Dreamcast. The other thing that was released this year that I do not have, I'm sure I'll get it and I'll do a video at some point, is the mode. Now, I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard about this thing. It's an ODE, multiple ODE mode. It's designed to go into the Dreamcast as well as the Sega Saturn. And the idea is it's an optical disc emulator. You can take the original disc drive out of the console, replace it with this, put a hard drive on it, and then, like, theoretically anyway, every single game ever is just running off of the hard drive. Again, don't have it, so I haven't done any sort of review or anything. But the fact that that would exist and that would be such a high demand thing is very cool, and that's awesome that that got to exist. But beyond that, the only other things that have really occurred is just kind of some general updates. Things like the DC HDMI is now called the DC Digital. It's had multiple firmware updates, keeping it up to date. Dan's doing a great job over there. A lot more people are buying those. I see a lot more people asking for GDMUs and modes and DC Digitals. And it's just like people want to just kind of keep this console alive in a nice, as I've always said, in a zombie-like way. It stays alive. And that's going to be very true because the future is more optimistic when it comes to the Dreamcast. Phil, Josh Prod, is the guy who runs, he's like the last big publisher for the Dreamcast. He actually announced that he's going to be doing, I think it's like 5 or even 6 new Sega Dreamcast games that are potentially going to come out later this year or into 2021. And like, so I give that dude props. And if anybody out there is an aspiring game developer and you want your game published on the Dreamcast, talk to Phil. He's always asking me, he's like, who has games that I can put on the Dreamcast? Like, he's always excited about the concept of doing that. And I know I've talked to a few others, developers who are excited about, I think Head Up, they're like an Austrian-German publisher. They make games for like PS4 and so on, and the Switch. I had a very brief interaction with them on Facebook. They're actually going to be publishing something for the Dreamcast as well, it sounds like. So, yeah, next year, hopefully we'll have a lot more game content. We just have to continue to ride out 2021. That's just the big theme of this. There's hope on the horizon after all of this. So regardless, even though your 21st birthday came in the worst year ever, I want to say happy birthday to the Sega Dreamcast. Go out and play your Dreamcast, everybody. And thank you very much for watching this video. Again, if you want to check the links in the description for any of this stuff, by all means, go ahead. You can also follow me through all the social media stuff that's in there as well. Like, comment, and subscribe. I appreciate that. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all later.